On the evening of February 20th, 1838, Miss Jane Alsop was residing at her home in London. The daughter of a gentleman, she likely felt comfortable and secure in her gated home that night. So much so that when she heard the gate doorbell ringing, she went outside, alone, to investigate. When she got outside, she saw a man who claimed to be a police officer. He ordered her to return inside and bring back a candle to light the area. Alsop obeyed. When she returned and handed over the candle, the man pulled off his cloak and held the candle to his face, revealing demonic bright red eyes. In an instant, the man shot blue and white flames out of his mouth and began scratching at Alsop with long, metallic claws.
Early reports described him in an animalistic way, like a bull, devil, or ghostly creature who could leap from the rooftops of London as if he had springs on the heels of his boots. Later accounts described him as an aristocratic gentleman or a devilish, humanoid figure with horns and red eyes. He targeted unaccompanied women, either by ringing their doorbell or by approaching them on the street, terrorizing them by clawing at their clothes and hair and breathing fire from his mouth.
Good evening. I'm James Troup.
And I'm Dominique Dibbell. Thanks for joining us.
You may remember our voices from previous haunting history videos.
But today we've convened in this anachronistic house to discuss a long-requested urban legend that blends both true crime and lore into a terrifying tale of mystery. Spring-Heeled Jack first began as the subject of rumor, making his way into newspaper, penny dreadfuls, and the collective nightmares of Victorian England.
Could Spring-Heeled Jack be a criminal of flesh and blood? Was he a supernatural demon? Or perhaps a fictional monster imagined in place of a more wretched reality? Let's see what answers we can uncover on this special episode of Haunting History.
During Queen Victoria's reign, society was divided up in rigid categories of class. The upper class consisted of royalty, officers, lords, business owners, and wealthy men. The middle class was made up of merchants, shopkeepers, store owners, and their employees. The lower class was made up of workers who were considered unskilled by society and experienced the brunt of unsafe and strenuous working conditions. During the Industrial Revolution, many members of the working class had to work long hours to survive, not just men, but women and children as well. Women who held jobs as maids, laundresses, or factory workers faced scrutiny. Their employment clashed with the strict gender roles of the time, which primarily designated women as mothers and homemakers. It was these vulnerable women who were the predominant victims of Spring-Heeled Jack. There were many reports of a monster made to the police from the mid-1820s on, but it wasn't until Jane Alsop, a daughter of a wealthy gentleman, filed her report with the police that Spring-Heeled Jack began to be taken seriously as a threat to the public.
According to her own report, Alsop narrowly escaped her encounter with Spring-Heeled Jack when her sister heard screams from the front gate and ran outside to rescue her. She managed to pull her back inside, and they both called for the police as Spring-Heeled Jack continued to ominously knock on the door until they arrived. After they arrived, police began investigating further and interviewed Alsop's neighbors. They found that other neighbors had been seeing and hearing attacks for weeks. Typically, when Spring-Heeled Jack attacked, it would occur one of two ways: just outside the home, as was the case with Alsop, when the victim would answer the doorbell, or randomly on the street, often when the victim was traveling without the presence of men. A month prior to the attack, Sir John Cohen, who was the Lord Mayor of London, had received an anonymous letter in which the author wanted to report a supernatural attacker to the police. The mayor released the letter to the press and replied to her request in a mocking tone, insinuating the author was likely a woman who was falling into hysteria.
After Alsop's harrowing report, however, the mockery died down and was replaced by fear. Just 7 days after Alsop's attack, the Morning Herald newspaper published an eyewitness account of Spring-Heeled Jack, this time by a young boy.
According to the report, a servant boy opened the front door to find a person of hideous appearance and a claw-like hand sporting a W family crest on his cloak. This would be the first clue to suggest that Spring-Heeled Jack was a human assailant, possibly a man of high status. Just over a week later, Spring-Heeled Jack attacked again. This time his victim was 18-year-old Lucy Scales and her sister. They were walking to their brother's house when a cloaked figure approached them. The figure spat flames into Lucy's face, and although her sister corroborated this, there were no reports of burns on her face from the hospital.
If Spring-Heeled Jack was indeed a person, how could he have breathed fire? During the investigation, a proprietor for the Pavilion Theater put forth a theory on the possible technology behind this special effect. The proprietor said that the dropping of certain strong acids on a sponge charged with spirits of wine would produce such appearances as those described, and that the color of the flame emitted would depend on the peculiar quality or description of acid. The theory was supported by one of the investigating officers who said the assailant could have breathed fire by blowing through a tube in which spirits of wine, sulfur, and another ingredient were deposited and ignited. With this theory to potentially explain the fire breathing, investigators turned their attention to the W family crest reported by the young boy and began investigating suspects. Many speculated that the Marquis of Waterford could be the true identity of Spring-Heeled Jack. So much so that the fictionalized version of Spring-Heeled Jack was later identified as the Marquis of Waterford in some of the Penny Dreadfuls written years later. The Marquis had a reputation for debauchery despite his noble status. During his time as a student at Eton College, he would often get drunk and smash windows, streak, riot, and offer money to others in exchange for fighting. Although he was arrested several times for disorderly conduct and charged once with rioting, he was never brought in on any charges related to Spring-Heeled Jack's crimes. Even when Spring-Heeled Jack was actively spreading fear through the streets of London, a play of the same name premiered at the Pavilion Theater, the same theater belonging to the proprietor who explained the fire-breathing special effect technique to investigators. The actor playing the fictionalized Spring-Heeled Jack could have used this very effect during the performance to both captivate and shock the audience. But it's still unconfirmed whether any true Spring-Heeled Jack perpetrators used a similar technique.
Several perpetrators did face some level of justice for crimes associated with Spring-Heeled Jack, but they were few and far between.
One witness named James Smith came forward after Alsop's attack, claiming to have seen two men walking away from Alsop's home that same night, all while hearing distant screams. The witness claimed that the men approached him and asked, "What have you to say to Spring Jack?" The two men, known only as Payne and Milbank, denied the allegations, but admitted to being drunk on the evening of the attack, remembering very little of what they did that night. James Painter was another individual arrested for imitating Spring-Heeled Jack to frighten women and children, but no other information is known about the specifics of Painter's crimes. Another man named Charles Grenville was fined and charged with aggravated assault for imitating the silly and dangerous pranks of Spring-Heeled Jack. He was the only individual that we know of who was formally charged with a crime. Regardless of these arrests, sightings and whispers of Spring-Heeled Jack continued through the years. In 1845, Maria Davis, a young sex worker, was allegedly attacked in broad daylight when Spring-Heeled Jack spat blue and white flames in her face and threw her over a bridge into a sewer. Her alleged drowning would account for the only direct death potentially attributed to Spring-Heeled Jack, although there are no existing reports or death certificates to verify whether this particular attack truly happened. Reported sightings continued through the late 1800s, but slowed by 1904, with some sporadic sightings cropping up during the 1920s. The fact that sightings continued even after a handful of perpetrators were caught supports a theory put forward by many folklorists, positing that Spring-Heeled Jack was more than one individual. It's likely that early attacks inspired copycat offenders through the years. Some historians also note a more dismal explanation for Spring-Heeled Jack's continued attacks. It's likely that many of the supposed victims of Spring-Heeled Jack were sexually assaulted, but during this time period, London newspapers often avoided using direct language when it came to sexual violence. Instead, they used vague and general statements, describing the victims as ill-treated. There were already many rigid social standards for women, and the shame surrounding victims of sexual violence was stifling. Some historians proposed that it may have been easier for women to blame the anonymous Spring-Heeled Jack for an attack, rather than an assailant they knew from their personal lives. But whether or not Spring-Heeled Jack was the true assailant, the threat of his attack, along with an even more sinister, anonymous figure known as Jack the Ripper later in the same era, pushed working-class Victorian women further into the margins. One newspaper from the time noted that women feared to walk abroad after nightfall in consequence of the molestations of a ghost or monster to which they were exposed.
Given the harsh realities of 1800s London, it's no question that for some, it was easier to believe in a devilish monster and place the blame squarely in its steely claws than to accept the repercussions of such an austere society. As the horror of attacks on Alsop and Scales, as well as Davis's alleged killing, died down, the perception of Spring-Heeled Jack transformed with the help of penny dreadfuls. These were short and salacious booklets that were deemed inappropriate and often regarded as lowbrow literature. Despite this, they were very popular among the average London citizen, and their dark stories were consumed by many readers. In 1863, a 40-part Penny Dreadful series reimagined Spring-Heeled Jack as a champion for women and those who had suffered injustice of some kind. This new fictional character reimagined the Marquis of Waterford as Spring-Heeled Jack's true identity. But rather than using his drunken, aristocratic, real-life persona, he was written as a heroic vigilante, similar to our modern-day Batman. As the years went on, Spring-Heeled Jack was recognized more so as a mysterious superhero. Other parts of the world had their own reimaginings of Spring-Heeled Jack, including World War II-era Czechoslovakia. Known as Perak, the Springman of Prague, he began as a mysterious paranormal trickster to be feared. He was widely understood as a fictional character, or retelling of England's Spring-Heeled Jack, rather than a figure born out of true events.
Perak was said to appear in the night to rescue Czech citizens from the Gestapo and from Nazi collaborators. He was rumored to leap from murky alleyways into the paths of passers-by, according to a book by C.A. MacDonald and Jan Kaplan on the Nazi occupation. He was known to both fight against the Gestapo as well as play tricks on them, and had a positive impact on an otherwise harsh existence for Czech citizens. World War II was a particularly harrowing time for the city of Prague, as it suffered under the cruel control of the SS. Many citizens felt unsafe in their own country, and they had to abide by a strict curfew that disallowed them from leaving their homes at night. Perak quickly became a popular symbol of rebellion and resistance, and he was featured in many animations, comics, and other works by Czech artists Jiří Trinka and Jiří Brdečka, who created their own rendition of the Spring Man. While we may never know the full truth behind Spring-Heeled Jack, he and his Czech counterpart ultimately grew into important roles that allowed communities to cope with immensely difficult and distressing circumstances.
It's true that these penny dreadful and comic book characters, born from a darker reality, eventually helped some through the more troublesome times of our past.
We hope you enjoyed this twisted tale of heroes, demons, villains, men, and monsters. Until we meet again.
Thank you again for joining us on this episode of Haunting History.